Hello everyone, and welcome back. Before we dive in, take a moment to get comfortable, maybe lower the lights, settle into your chair, and let your mind slow down just a little. Today's story is not about famous leaders, stock markets, or dramatic headlines. It is about the quiet strength that held families together when everything else was falling apart. Today, we are stepping into the world of the Great Depression and meeting the people who rarely made the history books, yet carried entire households on their shoulders, the housewives. When we talk about the Great Depression, we often focus on numbers: bank failures, unemployment rates, breadlines stretching down city blocks. But behind every statistic was a kitchen, a family table, and usually a woman standing in front of a nearly empty pantry, trying to figure out how to make tomorrow work. For millions of families, survival did not happen in government offices or factories. It happened at home, guided by women who turned scarcity into strategy and desperation into discipline. Housewives during the Great Depression were not simply managing homes. They were running full-scale survival operations. With little money and even fewer guarantees, they became planners, economists, nutritionists, engineers, and emotional anchors all at once. Their work started before sunrise and rarely ended before exhaustion forced them to sleep. And yet, much of what they did went unnoticed, assumed, or taken for granted. Imagine waking up each morning knowing there would be no paycheck arriving at the end of the week, no savings account to fall back on, and no certainty that tomorrow would be easier than today. That was the reality for countless families. In that uncertainty, the housewife became the stabilizing force. While the outside world felt unpredictable and fragile, the home had to remain functional, calm, and as reassuring as possible, especially for children. Food was the first and most constant challenge. Stretching meals was not just about cooking. It was about psychological management. A housewife had to make small portions feel sufficient, repetitive meals feel acceptable, and hunger feel temporary rather than frightening. She learned how to disguise sameness, how to rotate ingredients so beans did not feel like beans every single day. This was not about culinary creativity for pleasure, it was about morale. But survival went far beyond meals. Housewives controlled budgets that barely existed. Every coin mattered. Decisions were constant and exhausting: buy flour or sugar, save pennies for soap or spend them on milk, repair shoes again or hope they last one more week. These were not abstract choices. A wrong decision could mean discomfort, illness, or embarrassment for the family. At the same time, these women carried the emotional weight of the household. Children sensed stress even when adults tried to hide it. A housewife often became the shield, absorbing fear and uncertainty so the rest of the family would not have to. She smiled through thin meals, reassured children that everything was fine, and maintained routines because routines meant stability. Even when she was unsure herself, she projected calm. There was also the challenge of dignity. Poverty does not just test resources, it tests pride. Housewives worked quietly to preserve a sense of normalcy. Clothes were patched carefully, hair was kept neat, and homes were cleaned as best as possible, not because appearances mattered more than survival, but because dignity was part of survival. Feeling human, respectable, and worthy helped families endure long periods of hardship. Community played a role too. And housewives were often the connectors. They shared recipes, traded small favors, watched neighbors' children, and quietly helped when someone had even less. This network of mutual support was not organized or official, but it was powerful. It turned isolated households into communities that could endure together. A cup of flour today might mean help tomorrow. Importantly, the labor of housewives during the Great Depression was relentless and unpaid. There were no days off, no recognition, and no safety nets. Illness did not pause responsibilities. Fatigue did not cancel meals. The work continued because it had to. And while history often celebrates resilience in grand gestures, This was resilience expressed in repetition, in doing the same hard things every day without applause. What makes this role even more remarkable is that many of these women had been raised with very different expectations. Before the Depression, prosperity had seemed permanent to many families. When it vanished almost overnight, housewives had to unlearn habits of abundance and master skills of scarcity quickly. There was no training period, no manual, only necessity. Through all of this, housewives became quiet leaders. They did not command crowds or make speeches, but they influenced daily outcomes in powerful ways. A well-managed household could mean children stayed healthier, spirits stayed higher, and families stayed together longer. In an era when external control was limited, control over the home became vital. Looking back, it is easy to underestimate this kind of work because it left few physical records. No official reports tracked how many meals were stretched or how many worries were hidden behind calm expressions. But without these efforts, many families simply would not have survived the decade intact. The story of Great Depression housewives reminds us that history is not only shaped by dramatic events. It is shaped by persistence, by problem-solving under pressure, and by people who keep going even when the future is unclear. These women turned ordinary domestic work into acts of endurance, and in doing so, they became the backbone of survival for an entire generation. As we move forward in today's story, keep this image in mind: a woman standing in a modest kitchen, counting ingredients, planning carefully, holding worry at bay, and choosing once again to make tomorrow possible. That quiet decision, repeated day after day, is where survival truly began. Breakfast during the Great Depression was not the comforting, abundant meal many people imagine today. It was often the most fragile moment of the day, because it arrived after a long night of uncertainty and before any opportunity to earn, trade, or hope for something better. For housewives, breakfast was the first test of their ability to stretch limited resources, manage expectations, and set the emotional tone for the entire household. In many homes, the pantry was nearly empty by morning. There were no refrigerators filled with options, no variety to choose from. Every ingredient had already been counted, reused, or repurposed. Housewives learned quickly that breakfast did not have to be large, it had to be enough. Enough to quiet hunger, enough to give strength for work or school, and enough to feel like a proper beginning to the day. Coffee, if it existed at all, was rarely fresh. Used coffee grounds were dried and reused again and again, producing a weak, bitter drink that barely resembled what it once had been. Yet it was still called coffee, because names mattered. Calling it coffee preserved a sense of routine and familiarity, even if the taste had changed completely. For adults especially, that warm cup in the morning provided a small psychological comfort, a reminder of better times. For children, breakfast often meant porridge, cornbread, or plain bread if flour was available. Sugar was scarce, so sweetness became a luxury remembered rather than expected. Molasses or syrup, when available, was used sparingly, sometimes watered down to last longer. Milk was precious and often reserved for the youngest children. Older siblings learned early that sacrifice was part of family survival. Housewives became experts in repetition without despair. The same meal might appear morning after morning, but small changes helped disguise monotony. A different texture, a slightly altered preparation, or simply a change in presentation could make the meal feel new. This was not about taste, it was about morale. A household that began the day feeling defeated struggled to face the long hours ahead. Portion control was an art. Housewives learned how to divide food so precisely that everyone received something, even if it was very little. No one could eat until everyone was served. This rule reinforced fairness and prevented resentment. Children learned to eat slowly, to appreciate warmth and fullness rather than quantity. Hunger became a shared experience rather than an individual burden. Breakfast also carried symbolic weight. Even in poverty, Sitting down together when possible reinforced family unity. A shared meal, no matter how simple, reminded everyone that they were facing hardship together. Housewives understood this deeply. If breakfast disappeared entirely, it would signal not just scarcity, but collapse. So even the smallest meal mattered. In rural areas, some families relied on what they could grow or gather. Cornmeal, oats, or potatoes might form the backbone of breakfast. In cities, access was harder. Bread lines and charitable kitchens sometimes provided food, but pride often prevented families from relying on them regularly. Housewives balanced dignity with necessity, deciding when assistance was unavoidable and when they could manage one more day alone. Leftovers from dinner frequently reappeared at breakfast in new forms. Cold beans, fried potatoes, or reheated bread were common. Nothing was wasted. Even crumbs were saved, dried, and reused. Housewives treated food not as something disposable, but as something earned through effort, patience, and careful planning. Children often did not realize how calculated breakfast truly was. Many housewives shielded them from the anxiety behind the meal. A calm voice, a steady routine, and reassuring words helped children believe that breakfast was normal even when it was barely there. This emotional labor was as important as the cooking itself. The absence of abundance also taught lessons that lasted a lifetime. Children raised on Depression-era breakfasts grew up understanding value, restraint, and gratitude. They learned that food was not guaranteed, and that waste was unacceptable. These lessons, passed down quietly at the breakfast table, shaped habits for decades to come. In the end, breakfast during the Great Depression was not about nourishment alone. It was about preparation for the long day ahead, for uncertainty, and for survival itself. Through weak coffee, thin porridge, and shared silence, housewives transformed the first meal of the day into an act of resilience. Every morning they faced the same question: how do I begin today with what I have? And every morning, somehow, they found an answer. Once breakfast was managed, the real test of a housewife's skill began, stretching every single ingredient to feed the family throughout the day. The Great Depression forced ingenuity into the heart of daily life. Housewives quickly learned that survival depended not just on having food, but on making every scrap count. Cooking became a delicate balance of mathematics, chemistry, and creativity. For example, a small piece of meat could become multiple meals. Today, we might throw away bones or trimmings, but then, they were treasures. Bones were boiled into broth, and the resulting liquid became soup or gravy. Leftover meat was shredded, mixed with potatoes or rice, and transformed into new dishes. Even vegetable peelings were not discarded. They were turned into soups or stews. Nothing was wasted, and nothing went uncounted. Bread was particularly sacred. Stale bread was never thrown away, it became toast, breadcrumbs, or even a pudding. Housewives often soaked dry bread in milk or water, then added a pinch of sugar or egg if available, creating a surprisingly filling meal. Similarly, oatmeal could be mixed with mashed vegetables or a small amount of fat to create a dish that seemed more substantial than it was. Recipes were not about indulgence, they were about survival, but they also carried an element of psychological relief. The very act of cooking, of transforming tiny amounts of food into a nourishing meal, gave housewives a sense of control over an unpredictable world. Cooking became a quiet assertion of power in an era when external circumstances were overwhelmingly restrictive. The ingenuity extended to flavor as well. Herbs, spices, and even forage plants added taste to otherwise bland dishes. Dandelion greens, wild onions, or nettles might appear in soups or stews. Housewives experimented with combinations to keep meals palatable without ever having luxury ingredients. The goal was not culinary perfection, it was to make life feel a little less harsh, one bite at a time. Community also played a subtle role in creativity. Neighbors shared tips, ingredients, and small portions of food that stretched their own meals further. Recipes circulated informally, passed along like treasured secrets. Housewives adapted what they learned from others, swapping ideas about turning potatoes into pancakes or repurposing leftover grains into bread. In this way, survival became a cooperative art, with knowledge as valuable as food itself. Children absorbed this lesson too. Even if they were not fully aware of the scarcity, they noticed how meals were composed, how nothing was thrown away, and how small ingredients were transformed into more than the sum of their parts. These early lessons in creativity, patience, and resourcefulness left a lasting imprint, shaping values and habits well into adulthood. By mastering the art of stretching ingredients, housewives created not just meals, but stability. Families went to school or work with a sense of continuity, a reassurance that someone had managed the impossible overnight. In a world where money was scarce and opportunities limited, food became a symbol of resilience and ingenuity, a tangible proof that survival was still possible. After the challenge of feeding a family, another relentless task awaited the housewives of the Great Depression: maintaining personal hygiene and washing clothes. In today's world, laundry and bathing are taken for granted. Warm water flows at the turn of a knob, soap is plentiful, and washing machines hum quietly in the corner. But in the 1930s, every drop of water was precious, every bar of soap rationed, and every tub of laundry was a test of endurance, creativity, and patience. The day often began with the realization that water needed to be boiled on a stove before any washing could happen. Wood, coal, or whatever fuel could be salvaged became the lifeblood of the household. Bathing was not a daily affair. It required planning. The entire family shared a single tub, often set up in the kitchen where privacy was minimal. Curtains might be draped, but they offered more symbolism than true seclusion. Housewives would boil water in small batches, mixing it with cold water to reach a tolerable temperature. For the first person in the tub, the shock was immediate: freezing water that demanded courage just to step in. Soap was a luxury, often rationed to the smallest possible slivers. Some households made homemade soap, a laborious process that produced bars smelling faintly of hope but burning the skin like guilt. Shampoo, if it existed at all, was diluted and sparingly used. The goal of bathing was not comfort, it was cleanliness enough to prevent disease and maintain dignity as best as possible under harsh circumstances. Children were bathed sequentially, youngest last, often in water that was already tepid and murky from previous baths. Parents improvised with slotted spoons or small ladles, trying to maximize the use of every bucket of water. Towels were rotated, hung near the wood stove to dry, and reused until they were barely functional. The process required coordination and endurance, and it left little time or energy for anything else that day. Laundry day was a similarly grueling ritual. Households lacked modern washing machines, relying instead on tubs, washboards, and raw muscle power. Sorting clothes was more symbolic than practical. Everything often went in together, but the act of separating whites, colors, and formerly whites maintained morale and a sense of order. Cold water shocked the skin with every plunge, and bars of soap were shaved carefully to make them last. In some cases, baking soda or vinegar was substituted to create a semblance of cleanliness. Every article of clothing was scrubbed, twisted, and wrung with the hope that stains would loosen. Grass, mud, and unknown substances resisted every effort, turning laundry into a battle of endurance. The repetitive motions scrub, dunk, wring, repeat became almost meditative, a rhythm that allowed housewives to channel their frustration and focus on a tangible, manageable task in a chaotic world. The logistics of drying laundry were another challenge entirely. On sunny days, lines were strung in the yard, and clothes flapped in the breeze while birds sometimes stole scraps of fabric for nests. Reinforced improvisation chairs, doors, and heaters became makeshift drying racks. The house, often already cramped, transformed into an obstacle course of wet, stiffening garments. Yet when the process was complete, the smell of clean laundry, even if faintly soapy and slightly musty, brought a sense of achievement that was almost euphoric. Children learned the value of clothing during these times. Garments were patched repeatedly, handed down through multiple siblings or neighbors. Every shirt, dress, or pair of pants told a story of ingenuity, knees patched with extra fabric, sleeves extended, buttons reinforced. Even when children outgrew clothes, the remnants were repurposed as rags, dish towels, or emergency napkins. Fashion was redefined by necessity. The aesthetic became one of survival rather than style. Housewives also managed haircuts at home, using the kitchen as a salon. One pair of scissors, a mixing bowl, and a threadbare towel became the tools of the trade. Haircuts were performed with a mix of authority and gentle threats, often resulting in uneven styles but a sense of accomplishment. Even imperfect haircuts became lessons in resourcefulness, patience, and the ability to face small adversities with courage. The hygiene and laundry routines were more than chores, they were demonstrations of ingenuity, endurance, and problem-solving. Each successfully cleaned garment, each shared bath, and each mended article of clothing represented a small victory against the relentless pressure of poverty. These tasks also reinforced family bonds. Children learned patience, responsibility, and the importance of contributing to shared survival. The entire household became a cooperative system, each member understanding that every effort, no matter how small, mattered. Beyond cleanliness, these routines also carried psychological significance. Maintaining order in one's environment, keeping children clothed and clean, and preserving dignity in a world where external control had vanished, provided a measure of stability and mental fortitude. Housewives were not merely cleaning, they were constructing a framework for family resilience, creating a rhythm that structured days, gave hope, and preserved morale. Communities supported one another through these routines. Sharing scraps of clothing, trade of small household goods, and advice about mending and laundering helped stretch limited resources. Knowledge about homemade soaps, clever drying methods, and patching techniques circulated informally, contributing to a collective wisdom that made survival slightly more achievable. In this way, personal hygiene and laundry became acts of creativity, strategy, and even subtle artistry. Every scrubbed sock, patched pair of trousers, and tidily folded garment was a statement of defiance against scarcity and disorder. Housewives transformed mundane labor into an exercise of control and mastery, teaching lessons in patience, ingenuity, and endurance to every member of the household. Ultimately, surviving the daily grind of cleaning, bathing, and laundry during the Great Depression was not just about sanitation, it was about maintaining humanity, pride, and structure amidst chaos. These women navigated a landscape of scarcity with courage and skill, turning every chore into a demonstration of resilience. Their efforts kept families not only alive but functional, preserving dignity and teaching their children the value of resourcefulness. The everyday acts of hygiene and clothing management became vital threads in the fabric of Depression-era survival, binding households together through sweat, ingenuity, and unwavering determination. By the time evening arrived, housewives could finally sit, exhausted but satisfied. The kitchen, once a battlefield of soap, water, and scrubbing, now smelled faintly of cleanliness. Children pranced around in freshly laundered clothes, hair trimmed as best as possible, and everyone felt a small, shared pride. Even the most basic achievements, a clean shirt, a patched sock, a successful bath, represented victories over adversity. In these moments, the unseen heroes of the Great Depression revealed their superpower, turning hardship into structure, scarcity into resourcefulness, and exhaustion into survival. As the morning sun rose, The next trial for a housewife during the Great Depression was grocery shopping, a task that went far beyond selecting items from neatly stocked shelves. Supermarkets as we know them today were rare. Instead, families depended on small corner stores, local markets, and, for the lucky few, co-ops. Each shopping trip was a strategic expedition, a blend of reconnaissance, negotiation, and careful calculation designed to make every dollar last as long as possible. Housewives carried lists that were not just reminders, they were battle plans. Every item had a priority, a purpose, and a carefully calculated cost. Flour, sugar, salt, and lard were staples that formed the backbone of the family's diet. Meat, often scarce and expensive, was purchased sparingly, reserved for special occasions or stretched into soups and stews that could feed the entire family for days. Vegetables were bought seasonally, with an eye on preserving or pickling to last the winter months. Any miscalculation could spell hunger, making the stakes of shopping trips profoundly high. Bartering was a lifeline. Housewives leveraged homemade goods, eggs, butter, or preserved fruits to negotiate prices or trade for items that were otherwise unaffordable. Markets became arenas of subtle competition, where one's reputation for fairness, quality goods, and negotiation skill could directly influence what ended up in the shopping basket. Children sometimes accompanied mothers to learn the delicate art of bartering, absorbing lessons in value, patience, and persuasion that formal education rarely offered. Every visit required acute awareness of scarcity. A shop might have flour one day and none the next. Housewives quickly became experts at predicting supply patterns, memorizing the habits of shopkeepers, and forming networks with neighbors to share information about which stores had stock or when deliveries arrived. In a world of uncertainty, this knowledge became almost as valuable as the goods themselves. Price was only part of the equation. Quality mattered immensely. Sour milk, bruised vegetables, or stale bread could endanger health or make meals unpalatable. Housewives examined every item closely, balancing the twin goals of nutrition and cost-effectiveness. Often, creativity filled the gaps. Wilting vegetables were transformed into soups, day-old bread became breadcrumbs, and every scrap of leftover meat was integrated into casseroles or fried rice dishes. Nothing went to waste. Shopping also meant managing children. While necessary for education in household economy, they could be impatient, hungry, or curious, complicating the trip. Housewives employed subtle techniques to keep children occupied, handing them coins to spend, allowing them to carry light bundles, or weaving small games into the process. The journey to the market was as much a lesson in discipline as it was a quest for sustenance. During these excursions, women also learned resilience against social pressures. Stores were often crowded, tension high, and desperation palpable. Housewives needed nerves of steel to secure essentials amidst the throng of others who were equally determined. They quickly honed skills in diplomacy, assertiveness, and quick thinking, navigating both the physical and social challenges of the marketplace. Preservation was another crucial part of the shopping cycle. Every purchased item had to last longer than usual. Milk was boiled to prevent spoilage. Fruits and vegetables were canned or dried. Bread was wrapped tightly or toasted to extend freshness. Housewives became alchemists of storage, transforming raw ingredients into lasting, usable provisions. Iceboxes, when available, were managed meticulously, and even minor appliances or improvised cooling methods were optimized to prevent waste. Community networks amplified these efforts. Neighbors exchanged surplus eggs, shared preserves, or combined trips to save on transportation costs. Information about seasonal price fluctuations, rare availability of certain goods, or clever preservation techniques circulated informally, creating a system of mutual support. In many ways, grocery shopping became both a personal and communal strategy for survival. The mental load of this task cannot be overstated. Beyond planning, negotiating, and preserving, housewives had to anticipate future shortages, illnesses, and special occasions. Each decision impacted meals for the week, children's nutrition, and the overall morale of the family. The act of shopping became a strategic exercise, a delicate balance between thrift, creativity, and foresight. Sometimes, ingenuity extended into home production. Gardens, chicken coops, or small fruit trees supplemented store-bought goods. Housewives used every available inch of soil, every scrap of sunlight, and every drop of water to grow sustenance. They became horticulturists, planners, and food scientists all at once, transforming yards into lifelines and producing goods that could support bartering or directly feed the family. Shopping trips were also opportunities to teach children practical lessons in economics, negotiation, and resourcefulness. Observing their mothers calculate, measure, and barter offered lessons in arithmetic, decision-making, and moral judgment that textbooks could not provide. Children learned that scarcity demanded creativity, patience, and strategic thinking. Ultimately, grocery shopping and bartering during the Great Depression represented much more than the simple act of purchasing food. It was an exercise in strategy, resource management, and ingenuity. Each trip required careful preparation, vigilance, and adaptability in the face of uncertainty. Housewives navigated not only the logistics of supply and price but also the complex web of human interaction, reputation, and negotiation. By the time the family returned home, every item carried significance beyond its immediate utility. Flour, sugar, eggs, or vegetables represented planning, effort, and tactical skill. Meals created from these purchases were daily victories, small but profound assertions of competence, resilience, and care. Each shopping excursion and bartering effort strengthened the household's survival toolkit, teaching skills that would echo across generations. In the end, the discipline, foresight, and resourcefulness required for grocery shopping during the Great Depression reinforced a central truth: survival depended as much on ingenuity, adaptability, and community as it did on physical sustenance. Housewives were not simply procuring ingredients. They were managing risk, preserving dignity, and teaching invaluable life skills to the next generation. Their careful planning, clever bartering, and unyielding patience ensured that families were fed, nourished, and equipped to face each new day of hardship. As the chill of winter set in during the Great Depression, housewives faced yet another crucial challenge: keeping their homes warm and functioning with minimal resources. Heating a house in those days was far from the convenient thermostats and central heating we take for granted today. Instead, families relied on wood, coal, or even scraps of brush and kindling, often purchased at high cost or gathered painstakingly from nearby forests and vacant lots. Ensuring warmth was not just a comfort issue, it was a matter of survival, particularly for children and the elderly. The preparation began long before the first cold snap. Housewives meticulously monitored fuel supplies, calculating consumption rates based on the size of stoves, fireplaces, and the weather forecast. They became experts in rationing, knowing precisely how many logs or pounds of coal would be needed each day. Every piece of fuel was precious. Wasted heat or poorly managed fires could have serious consequences for both warmth and finances. Firing up a stove or fireplace was an art as much as a necessity. The goal was to maximize efficiency while minimizing consumption. Housewives layered logs carefully, monitored airflow, and tended to embers with constant attention. In some households, kitchen stoves doubled as both cooking devices and heat sources, forcing women to balance culinary timing with temperature management. Breakfast might be delayed not because of hunger, but to conserve fuel for the day. Fuel collection was another demanding task. For those who could gather wood from nearby areas, it required physical labor, careful cutting, and safe transportation to the home. Coal delivery, when possible, involved either expensive purchases or strenuous hauling from rail depots or suppliers. The weight of these materials and the regularity of the task added both physical and mental stress to the housewife's daily routine. Beyond heating, household management demanded meticulous planning in other areas. Water had to be hauled from wells, springs, or municipal pumps. Without modern plumbing, housewives spent hours each day managing water for cooking, cleaning, and personal hygiene. The act of carrying buckets, often in frigid conditions, was taxing, and mistakes could result in scalding, freezing, or wasted resources. Cleaning and maintaining a home with limited supplies also required creativity. Soap was expensive, so washing clothes or dishes involved careful rationing, reusing water, and leveraging natural cleaning agents like ashes, vinegar, or lemon. Floors were scrubbed repeatedly, windows washed with cloths and old newspapers, and furniture repaired with scraps of wood or nails scavenged from previous projects. Every action had to be intentional, with a clear eye toward longevity and efficiency. Lighting the home was equally strategic. Gas and electric lights were luxuries for many families, so candles, oil lamps, or improvised wick systems were commonly used. Housewives learned to stretch these sources as far as possible, extinguishing lamps in unused rooms, using mirrors to amplify light, and teaching children to conduct tasks with minimal illumination. Nighttime routines revolved around conserving energy while ensuring safety, particularly when children needed to study or perform household chores. Meal preparation and heating intersected with energy conservation. Stoves often served multiple purposes, cooking meals, heating water, and warming rooms. Housewives mastered techniques like double boiling, slow cooking, and using residual heat to stretch fuel usage. The timing of meals and household chores was carefully orchestrated to minimize waste and maximize efficiency. Even seemingly small habits covering pots to retain heat, using cast iron skillets for even cooking, or storing leftovers properly were informed by necessity and ingenuity. The cold was also a teacher of frugality and adaptability. Households developed routines to stay warm with minimal fuel, wearing layers indoors, huddling under blankets, using hot water bottles, or sharing sleeping quarters. Every adaptation reflected an intimate understanding of resources, human comfort, and the unpredictability of winter. These practices demanded patience, discipline, and constant vigilance. Community networks played a role here as well. Neighbors often shared knowledge about fuel availability, cooperatively purchased bulk supplies, or lent tools for stove maintenance. Advice circulated about how to optimize heating efficiency, preserve wood, or maintain oil lamps, creating informal support systems that extended beyond simple friendship. Knowledge of these strategies could mean the difference between a warm home and a bitterly cold, uncomfortable night. Housewives also contended with emergencies. Sudden freezes, broken stoves, or fuel shortages demanded quick thinking. Improvised solutions burning scrap wood, insulating windows with cloth or newspaper, or rerouting cooking schedules were daily exercises in problem solving. These experiences honed skills in crisis management and resource prioritization, teaching lessons that would resonate throughout life. The psychological aspect of managing a household under these conditions cannot be understated. Constant vigilance over heating, water, and energy consumption required mental stamina. Every task, from tending fires to managing chores, carried consequences for family comfort and safety. Housewives bore the weight of responsibility not just for the physical survival of their households but for morale and stability in an era of uncertainty. Ultimately, heating, fuel management, and household maintenance were far more than mundane chores. They demanded creativity, strategic thinking, and careful planning. Housewives functioned as engineers, planners, and managers, juggling multiple variables to keep homes safe, warm, and functional. Their work ensured that families could endure harsh conditions without succumbing to illness, fatigue, or despair. In reflecting on these practices, it becomes clear that the housewife's role during the Great Depression was multifaceted, extending far beyond what modern eyes might assume. Every log placed on a fire, every bucket of water carried, and every improvised solution represented a small but significant act of resilience. These women not only preserved life and comfort but also nurtured ingenuity, problem-solving, and patience in their children, ensuring that the lessons of endurance and resourcefulness would persist for generations. Through these daily challenges, housewives emerged as quiet architects of survival, crafting order, warmth, and sustainability from the scarce and unpredictable resources at their disposal. Their meticulous management of household energy and resources underlines a profound truth: survival is as much about strategy, foresight, and adaptability as it is about access to material goods. Managing children during the Great Depression added another layer of responsibility to the already demanding life of housewives. With families struggling to stretch limited incomes, childcare was intertwined with survival, education, and moral guidance. Mothers were not just caregivers. They became teachers, mentors, and emotional anchors in a world of uncertainty. Every day required careful planning to ensure that children were fed, clothed, nurtured, and, when possible, educated. For many families, formal schooling was inconsistent. Some children had to work to contribute to the household income, while others attended underfunded schools with minimal resources. In response, housewives often became primary educators, teaching literacy, arithmetic, practical skills, and life lessons from the kitchen table or living room floor. Education was adapted to the family's circumstances. Reading lessons might take place alongside cooking, while counting exercises could be incorporated into rationing or measuring ingredients. Even seemingly mundane activities, mending clothes, tending a garden, or managing a household budget, were turned into practical lessons in mathematics, resourcefulness, and responsibility. Health and hygiene were inseparable from education. Mothers taught children to maintain cleanliness despite limited water or soap, using creative methods such as reusing bathwater or employing natural cleaning agents like vinegar and ashes. Children learned early on how to care for themselves, wash dishes efficiently, and handle food safely. These lessons instilled discipline, patience, and awareness of scarcity, traits essential for survival in hard times. Nutrition was another critical area where mothers played dual roles as caregivers and teachers. With scarce food, every meal became a lesson in planning and moderation. Housewives taught children how to appreciate and make the most of simple ingredients, stretching meals to provide adequate nutrition while minimizing waste. Even small decisions, choosing which vegetables to include, how to prepare leftovers, or how to preserve food for future use, were guided by practical lessons in economy and foresight. Emotional support was equally vital. The psychological toll of poverty, hunger, and social uncertainty was heavy, and children were acutely aware of the stress around them. Housewives acted as stabilizing forces, offering comfort, reassurance, and structure. Bedtime routines, storytelling, and daily rituals provided a sense of security, continuity, and predictability. These practices nurtured resilience, helping children understand that despite hardship, family bonds and routines remained intact. Housewives also adapted play to serve educational and practical purposes. Games often doubled as training in skills such as sewing, gardening, or basic craftsmanship. Outdoor activities encouraged physical stamina, problem-solving, and cooperation. Even simple homemade toys or creative improvisations with household scraps became tools for teaching resourcefulness, creativity, and patience. These activities were subtle but effective ways to prepare children for the realities of the world while fostering a sense of enjoyment and accomplishment. In addition to practical skills, moral and ethical instruction was central to childcare. Mothers emphasized honesty, hard work, cooperation, and empathy, ensuring that children understood their responsibilities to both family and community. Sharing, helping neighbors, and contributing to household chores were presented not as burdens but as important life lessons. These teachings reinforced a sense of purpose, pride, and belonging, which were crucial to psychological well-being during challenging times. Education extended to social awareness as well. Housewives often used real-world examples to teach children about economics, labor, and social conditions. Conversations about budgeting, bartering, or neighborhood assistance became practical lessons in civics and community responsibility. By integrating these concepts into daily life, mothers provided children with a broader understanding of society while reinforcing the importance of adaptability and problem-solving. Balancing childcare, education, and household management required immense organizational skill. Housewives created structured routines that accommodated mealtimes, chores, study, and rest. They prioritized tasks based on urgency and necessity, often multitasking while supervising children's activities. The ability to juggle multiple responsibilities simultaneously was essential, as neglecting one area could have cascading effects on health, nutrition, or morale. In some households, older children assisted with teaching younger siblings, extending the educational and caregiving network within the family. This approach fostered leadership skills, accountability, and cooperation. Mothers guided and supervised, ensuring that responsibilities were shared without compromising learning or well-being. These family-centered educational systems created an interdependent environment where children learned both academic skills and social responsibility. Despite these challenges, housewives found ways to incorporate creativity, curiosity, and joy into learning. Storytelling, music, and crafts provided relief from monotony and hardship while reinforcing cognitive and emotional development. Even limited resources became opportunities for innovation. Children learned to make books from scraps, draw with homemade inks, or explore nature as a living classroom. Such ingenuity ensured that education remained engaging, meaningful, and relevant to their daily experiences. The dual roles of caregiver and educator highlighted the multifaceted nature of housewives' labor. Their work went beyond providing sustenance and shelter. It encompassed intellectual, emotional, and moral development. Every lesson in arithmetic, hygiene, or resource management was intertwined with practical survival, demonstrating how education could be seamlessly integrated into daily life. The housewife's role as educator also had long-term implications. Children raised with these lessons often carried forward skills in resourcefulness, critical thinking, and resilience. They witnessed firsthand the importance of preparation, foresight, and adaptability, qualities that would serve them well throughout their lives. The blending of survival skills with formal and informal education created a generation attuned to both practical realities and intellectual growth. In reflecting on these responsibilities, it becomes clear that the housewife's role in childcare and education was both demanding and profoundly influential. She served as a bridge between necessity and opportunity, shaping children's physical, intellectual, and emotional development under conditions that tested endurance, creativity, and patience. The strategies she employed, from integrating learning into household chores to fostering resilience through structured routines, exemplify a remarkable blend of practicality and foresight. Ultimately, the housewife during the Great Depression was an unsung educator, a mentor, and a nurturer, ensuring that children not only survived but also learned to thrive in challenging circumstances. Her work demonstrates the interconnection between domestic labor, education, and the cultivation of resilience, offering valuable insights into the often overlooked dimensions of family life in historical contexts. By managing childcare and education with ingenuity and care, housewives reinforced the foundation upon which families could endure hardship and maintain a sense of hope for the future. In the midst of the Great Depression, the housewife's role extended far beyond the walls of her own home. Survival often depended on the strength of the broader community, and housewives became vital participants in networks of mutual aid, resource sharing, and social support. These informal networks were not just practical, they shaped emotional well-being, reinforced social bonds, and helped families navigate scarcity with dignity. Neighborly cooperation became a lifeline. Housewives exchanged food, clothing, and household items, often trading surplus goods for items they lacked. A bag of flour might be swapped for fresh eggs, or a repaired garment for a loaf of bread. These exchanges were rooted in trust, reciprocity, and shared experience, creating interdependent systems that helped families meet basic needs without relying solely on dwindling cash resources. Community gatherings played a similar role in reinforcing social and practical connections. Events like church socials, neighborhood potlucks, or sewing circles were opportunities for housewives to exchange knowledge, coordinate mutual aid, and provide emotional support. Advice on gardening, canning, or mending clothes was shared freely, spreading techniques that maximized efficiency and minimized waste. Beyond material assistance, these gatherings offered emotional relief, allowing housewives to vent frustrations, share victories, and feel a sense of belonging amidst hardship. Childcare often became a communal effort. Neighbors took turns watching each other's children, enabling mothers to work, run errands, or engage in income-generating activities. This informal system of cooperative babysitting not only relieved individual burdens but also fostered a sense of shared responsibility for the next generation. Children benefited from exposure to a broader network of caregivers, learning cooperation, empathy, and social skills that complemented the lessons taught at home. Community support extended to moral and emotional resilience. Housewives frequently relied on friends and neighbors to navigate crises, whether illness, job loss, or food shortages. Sharing struggles and solutions created a sense of solidarity and reduced feelings of isolation. In times of grief or anxiety, social networks offered comfort, advice, and practical assistance, reinforcing the understanding that no family faced hardship entirely alone. Churches and civic organizations also played critical roles in community networking. They provided resources like soup kitchens, clothing donations, and educational programs, often coordinated by housewives themselves. Volunteering in these organizations allowed women to contribute actively to communal welfare while gaining access to assistance for their own families. Participation reinforced social ties, developed leadership skills, and strengthened the reciprocal bonds that underpinned neighborhood solidarity. Informal skill-sharing networks were another cornerstone of community survival. Housewives taught each other cooking techniques for stretching meals, methods for preserving fruits and vegetables, and tips for making clothing last longer. Knowledge about medicinal herbs, home remedies, and practical fixes for household problems circulated rapidly through these networks, becoming a shared repository of survival wisdom. This informal education was crucial, especially in areas where formal instruction was limited or unavailable. Bartering and cooperative economies emerged as central features of community life. When money was scarce, housewives innovated ways to trade labor and goods. A neighbor might help with laundry in exchange for garden produce. A sewing circle might repair multiple families' clothing in a shared session. Such arrangements preserved dignity while ensuring that essential needs were met, illustrating the ingenuity and adaptability fostered by communal cooperation. The role of women in these networks often emphasized moral guidance and social cohesion. Housewives encouraged fairness, honesty, and mutual respect within exchanges, reinforcing ethical behavior alongside practical assistance. Children observed these interactions, learning the importance of community responsibility and the value of contributing to collective well-being. In this way, community support networks functioned as extensions of domestic education, reinforcing lessons about cooperation, empathy, and civic engagement. These networks also helped families navigate uncertainty. During periods of job loss, illness, or natural hardship, community connections provided a buffer against complete economic collapse. Whether through shared meals, lending of tools, or pooling of resources, neighbors created safety nets that allowed families to endure without losing hope entirely. The emotional reassurance that came from knowing others were invested in one's survival was as vital as the material support itself. Despite the benefits, maintaining these networks required careful social navigation. Trust had to be earned and sustained, and social norms dictated the appropriate balance of giving and receiving. Housewives had to exercise discretion, generosity, and tact to ensure that relationships remained equitable and mutually beneficial. In many cases, reputation within the community was as valuable as the resources one could offer, reflecting the intertwined nature of social and material capital. Women also served as connectors across generations. Older housewives shared knowledge and experience with younger women, passing down skills, strategies, and wisdom that helped new families navigate scarcity. These intergenerational bonds reinforced continuity, preserving cultural practices, recipes, and household techniques that were vital for survival. Younger women gained mentorship and practical guidance, while older women found purpose and respect, strengthening the social fabric. The significance of community support networks went beyond immediate survival. They fostered resilience, strengthened interpersonal bonds, and cultivated a sense of agency in a period when economic and social structures often seemed beyond individual control. Housewives were central to these networks, using their skills, knowledge, and social acumen to orchestrate cooperation, mediate disputes, and maintain morale. Their work ensured that families could withstand hardship while maintaining social cohesion and dignity. In reflecting on this aspect of life during the Great Depression, it is clear that community support and networking were not optional. They were essential. Housewives leveraged personal skills, social intelligence, and resourcefulness to build networks that provided food, childcare, education, and emotional sustenance. Through these efforts, they transformed adversity into opportunity, creating systems of mutual aid that enabled families to survive and even thrive in challenging circumstances. Ultimately, the housewife's engagement with her community illustrates the broader social dimension of domestic labor. Beyond cooking, cleaning, and child rearing, she was a facilitator, educator, and organizer, ensuring that both her family and the wider community could navigate scarcity with cooperation, resilience, and shared purpose. These networks of support, built on trust, reciprocity, and skill sharing, were a testament to human ingenuity and the enduring power of community during one of the most challenging periods in modern history. During the Great Depression, clothing was both a necessity and a symbol of pride, but it was also one of the first areas where families faced extreme financial pressure. With limited income, housewives became masters of creativity and resourcefulness, ensuring that their families remained clothed and presentable despite scarcity. The wardrobe of a family was not just about style, it was about survival, ingenuity, and social perception, and the housewife's skills in this area were indispensable. One of the most common practices was mending and repairing worn clothing. Every hole, tear, or frayed hem was an opportunity for a housewife to extend the life of a garment. Patching, darning, and reinforcing seams became routine tasks, often requiring considerable dexterity and patience. Housewives learned specialized stitching techniques to make repairs nearly invisible, preserving dignity while conserving resources. A patched coat or pair of shoes might have carried a mark of resilience rather than poverty, reflecting the creativity and labor invested by its maker. Repurposing old garments was another critical skill. Fabric from worn-out clothes could be transformed into quilts, aprons, children's clothing, or even reusable household items like dust rags. Dresses could be shortened or altered to suit a growing child, while worn shirts might be cut into washcloths or cleaning cloths. This approach minimized waste and maximized utility, demonstrating a keen understanding of materials and their potential applications. Housewives essentially ran micro-recycling operations within their homes, turning discarded items into valuable goods that served both functional and aesthetic purposes. Sewing from scratch became a necessity for many families. Housewives who possessed sewing skills could create entire wardrobes using purchased fabric or even repurposed materials from older garments. Patterns were often improvised or modified from magazines, newspapers, or hand-me-down designs, allowing women to produce clothing that was both practical and stylish. Children's clothes were frequently made at home, tailored to fit perfectly and adapted as the child grew. For special occasions, such as holidays or community events, housewives would often go the extra mile, creating outfits that were visually appealing and socially acceptable despite limited resources. Hand-me-downs and clothing exchanges were also integral to stretching wardrobes. Families with more than one child often passed down clothing from older siblings to younger ones, carefully repairing and altering items to extend their usability. Neighbors and friends participated in clothing swaps, trading garments that no longer fit one family for items that could benefit another. This not only conserved resources but also reinforced community ties, turning clothing into a medium of social support and reciprocity. Creative embellishment became an important aspect of making worn clothing look new or festive. Housewives used embroidery, applique, and decorative stitching to refresh faded fabrics or cover stains, transforming old garments into something aesthetically pleasing. Buttons, ribbons, and lace were salvaged from discarded clothing or purchased cheaply to add flair, demonstrating that resourcefulness and artistry could coexist. These efforts allowed families to maintain a sense of pride and personal expression, even in the face of material limitation. Footwear posed a particular challenge. Shoes wore out quickly, and new pairs were expensive. Housewives learned shoe repair techniques, from resoling and patching to stretching and polishing, to prolong the life of every pair. Rubber heels could be replaced, leather stitched, and worn soles reinforced. Children's shoes were especially carefully managed. They were often resoled, passed down, or modified with adjustable straps to accommodate growing feet. In many cases, a well-maintained pair of shoes was a mark of dignity, demonstrating the housewife's skill and care. Textile economy extended beyond clothing. Housewives often made or repaired household linen sheets, towels, tablecloths, and curtains to preserve functionality and appearance. Frayed edges were hemmed, small holes patched, and entire linens repurposed into other household items if needed. The ability to maintain household textiles efficiently reflected both thrift and domestic competence, ensuring that the home remained orderly and welcoming despite economic strain. Resourcefulness also intersected with economic opportunity. Housewives sometimes generated income through sewing and mending services for neighbors or local families. Those with exceptional skill in alterations, embroidery, or garment creation could earn much-needed cash or goods, supplementing the family budget while showcasing their expertise. This blurred the lines between domestic labor and entrepreneurship, illustrating the economic value of traditionally unpaid skills within the household. Fashion consciousness persisted, even under constraints. Housewives followed trends as best they could, adapting styles to available materials. They would modify dresses, trim skirts, or accessorize with scarves, belts, or homemade jewelry to reflect contemporary tastes. Creativity in adapting fashion not only maintained social respectability but also fostered a sense of identity and self-expression, allowing families to project confidence despite economic hardship. Social events amplified the importance of clothing. Even modest garments required careful presentation for church services, community gatherings, or celebrations. Housewives were responsible for ensuring their families looked neat and appropriate, balancing practicality with social expectations. Attention to detail in clothing, grooming, and presentation was a point of pride, reflecting the housewife's role in managing both domestic economy and family reputation. Children's clothing often highlighted ingenuity and resourcefulness. Playwear had to be durable, easy to wash, and adaptable to growth, while school clothing needed to meet social standards on a tight budget. Housewives learned to combine durability with aesthetic appeal, creating garments that allowed freedom of movement while still appearing respectable. This required clever fabric choices, strategic reinforcement, and a thorough understanding of a child's needs across various activities. Cultural practices and traditions influenced clothing decisions as well. Housewives preserved ceremonial attire, regional garments, or heirloom pieces, often passing them down or repurposing them thoughtfully. These items connected families to their heritage, providing continuity and identity amidst widespread economic uncertainty. Sewing, mending, and fabric reuse became a way to preserve cultural memory while meeting practical needs. The resourcefulness exhibited in clothing management reflected a broader set of skills: problem-solving, planning, creativity, and foresight. Housewives anticipated growth, wear, and changing social needs, making deliberate choices to maximize utility and minimize waste. Their expertise was an essential element of family survival, demonstrating ingenuity that extended beyond the domestic sphere into economic, social, and cultural realms. Ultimately, the housewife's role in fashion and clothing during the Great Depression illustrates a profound intersection of necessity and creativity. Her labor ensured that families remained clothed, respectable, and socially connected, despite extreme financial constraints. Through mending, repurposing, sewing, and resourceful management, she preserved both material and symbolic wealth, maintaining dignity, social respect, and familial cohesion in an era of widespread scarcity. The legacy of these practices extends beyond historical interest. They exemplify resilience, innovation, and the ability to adapt creatively under pressure. The skills, knowledge, and strategies developed by housewives during this period highlight the often underappreciated complexity and significance of domestic labor, proving that survival in challenging times relied as much on ingenuity and careful management as on mere material resources. In the era of the Great Depression, food was far more than mere sustenance. It was a symbol of survival, resourcefulness, and foresight. Housewives bore the primary responsibility for ensuring that their families were fed, not just day by day, but across weeks and months when income was irregular, scarce, or non-existent. This role demanded meticulous planning, creativity, and an intimate understanding of food storage, preservation, and seasonal cycles. A cornerstone of domestic survival was food preservation. Housewives became experts in canning, pickling, drying, and storing foods to ensure that the family could endure lean periods. Fruits and vegetables harvested from gardens, or purchased in bulk when affordable, were often canned in jars, boiled to kill bacteria, and sealed carefully to prevent spoilage. Pickling with vinegar or salt allowed vegetables like cucumbers, cabbage, and beets to last for months. Dried fruits, herbs, and grains were stored in airtight containers to extend their usability. These techniques required precise timing, attention to detail, and an understanding of chemistry and temperature to avoid waste or contamination. Gardens played a critical role in food security. Many families maintained kitchen gardens, producing vegetables, fruits, and herbs to supplement their diets. Housewives coordinated planting to ensure continuous harvests throughout the growing season. Companion planting, crop rotation, and careful soil management were techniques learned through necessity, passed down from generation to generation. Seasonal planning involved anticipating the availability of fresh produce and aligning preservation efforts accordingly. For example, a bumper crop of tomatoes would be canned as sauce or paste, ensuring that the family could enjoy its nutritional and flavor benefits long after the harvest had ended. Meal planning and rationing were equally crucial. Housewives learned to stretch limited supplies into multiple meals, balancing nutrition, taste, and portion control. Meat, often expensive and scarce, was used sparingly, sometimes replaced with legumes, grains, or root vegetables to maintain protein intake without overspending. Leftovers were creatively transformed into soups, stews, casseroles, or fried dishes, ensuring nothing was wasted. Even stale bread could be repurposed into puddings, croutons, or stuffing. This mindset required both culinary skill and strategic thinking, turning scarcity into opportunity. Housewives also mastered fermentation and other preservation techniques. Homemade sauerkraut, kimchi, or fermented dairy products provided essential nutrients while extending the shelf life of perishable items. Cheese making and butter churning were common practices in rural households, converting milk into more durable forms that could be stored safely. Knowledge of fermentation, acidity levels, and proper container use was critical, as improper handling could lead to spoilage or foodborne illness. Freezing and cold storage were less common during the early 1930s, as home refrigeration was a luxury for many. However, iceboxes, root cellars, and cold pantries provided alternative means of preserving food. Root vegetables, potatoes, apples, and cabbage could be stored in cool, dark conditions for months, while cured meats and dairy products were carefully wrapped and monitored to maintain quality. Housewives understood how to maximize the storage life of every item, rotating stock and checking for signs of spoilage regularly. The economics of food purchasing required shrewd decision-making. Housewives sought sales, bulk purchases, and seasonal bargains, often negotiating or trading with neighbors to secure essential items. Non-perishable staples such as flour, sugar, beans, rice, and salt were stocked when affordable, forming the backbone of weekly meal planning. The ability to foresee needs, anticipate shortages, and budget effectively was essential, linking financial management to culinary resourcefulness. Community support networks were an essential complement to individual efforts. Housewives often exchanged surplus produce, canned goods, or preserved items with neighbors, creating informal local economies that reinforced social cohesion. Potlucks, community kitchens, and shared canning parties not only distributed food but also disseminated techniques, recipes, and tips for efficiency. These networks amplified the ability of families to survive, blending cooperation with personal ingenuity. Housewives also became adept at nutritional improvisation, ensuring that even limited diets provided essential vitamins, minerals, and calories. Wild foraging, fishing, and hunting supplemented homegrown produce, particularly in rural areas. Leaves, berries, nuts, and edible roots were incorporated into meals, and creative substitutes were used for costly ingredients. For example, molasses or corn syrup might replace sugar, or breadcrumbs could substitute for flour in thickening sauces or coating meats. Knowledge of nutrition, though less formalized than today, was practical and deeply integrated into daily labor. Preservation extended beyond individual households to consider seasonal planning for the family calendar. Housewives anticipated lean winter months and planned planting, harvesting, and storage accordingly. Seeds were saved from successful crops, preserving both the genetic diversity of the garden and the family's capacity for the next year. Detailed records, whether in notebooks or mental logs, tracked planting dates, harvest yields, and consumption rates. This systematic approach reflected not only discipline and foresight but also the intersection of labor, knowledge, and survival strategy. Food preservation also had cultural significance. Seasonal canning, baking, and holiday cooking connected families to traditions, rituals, and communal identity. Fruit preserves, pickles, jams, and baked goods were not just sustenance. They symbolized care, hospitality, and continuity. Even in times of scarcity, these practices fostered a sense of normalcy, pride, and emotional resilience, reinforcing social bonds within and beyond the household. In extreme circumstances, the ability to stretch and improvise was vital. Housewives became inventors in the kitchen, developing recipes that made modest ingredients appear abundant. Substitutions were made seamlessly. Soup might incorporate vegetable scraps, bones, or stale bread. Casseroles blended minimal proteins with grains and vegetables to create filling, nutritious meals. This ingenuity ensured that no calorie or ingredient was wasted, demonstrating a sophisticated understanding of both nutrition and household economy. Finally, the labor involved in food preservation and planning exemplified the hidden complexity of domestic work. It demanded long hours, precise timing, and careful coordination with every aspect of family life. Meals, preservation, and storage were not isolated tasks. They were part of an integrated system linking finances, social life, health, and cultural identity. The housewife's expertise ensured the survival and well-being of her family, highlighting the indispensable skill and intelligence embedded in domestic labor during this challenging period. Through careful preservation, strategic planning, and creative improvisation, housewives transformed scarcity into sustainability. Their efforts exemplified resilience, foresight, and adaptability, ensuring that families could endure economic hardship while maintaining dignity, health, and social cohesion. These practices were a testament to human ingenuity under pressure, illustrating how everyday domestic labor became a cornerstone of survival during one of history's most difficult decades. During the Great Depression, maintaining family health went far beyond routine care. It was a matter of survival. With limited access to medical services, expensive medications, and nutritious food, housewives became the first line of defense against illness, injury, and chronic conditions. Their responsibilities encompassed preventive care, home remedies, sanitation, and education about personal hygiene, all of which demanded vigilance, knowledge, and ingenuity. Sanitation within the home was a constant priority. Families relied on clean water, waste management, and careful housekeeping to prevent the spread of disease. Wells or municipal water sources were often contaminated, so water had to be boiled or filtered when possible. Kitchens and dining areas were meticulously cleaned, as foodborne illnesses could strike even the most careful household. Laundry was labor-intensive, involving boiling clothes, scrubbing, and drying in sunlight to kill bacteria and maintain hygiene. Bathing routines, though less frequent than today, were structured to maximize cleanliness with minimal resources. The careful management of these basic practices reflected a sophisticated understanding of infection prevention long before antibiotics or modern public health campaigns were widely accessible. Housewives also became guardians of nutrition for immunity and strength. Limited food supplies made it challenging to ensure a balanced diet, yet careful planning prioritized nutrient-dense foods to maintain health. Fresh produce from gardens, dairy products, legumes, and occasional proteins were distributed thoughtfully across meals to provide the vitamins and minerals necessary for resisting illness. Where deficiencies were likely, home remedies and supplements such as cod liver oil for vitamin D were utilized. Understanding the link between diet and health was practical knowledge, reinforced by trial, observation, and shared wisdom among communities. Home remedies and basic medical care formed another pillar of family health management. Aspirin, castor oil, herbal teas, and poultices were common treatments for fevers, digestive issues, colds, and minor injuries. Housewives learned to recognize symptoms, assess severity, and decide when professional medical care was essential or when self-treatment sufficed. The ability to manage common ailments reduced dependency on costly doctors and minimized the risk of untreated conditions worsening. Many remedies were passed down from older generations, combining practical knowledge with cultural traditions, forming a rich repertoire of household medicine. Preventive measures extended to childcare and infant health, which were critical given the higher infant mortality rates of the period. Feeding schedules, proper sanitation of bottles and utensils, and attention to signs of illness were daily concerns. When vaccines were unavailable or scarce, housewives relied on hygiene, diet, and isolation techniques to prevent disease spread. Teaching children habits such as hand washing, covering coughs, and using clean water helped instill routines that could protect the entire household. Mental health and emotional well-being were also indirectly addressed through these routines. During a time of economic strain, maintaining a structured, orderly home provided stability and reduced stress. Clean, well-managed living spaces, regular meals, and attention to the physical health of family members created an environment where anxiety and illness were less likely to take root. Housewives often acted as emotional anchors, offering care, reassurance, and consistency amid the uncertainty of daily life. The importance of community knowledge sharing in health management cannot be overstated. Housewives exchanged tips on home remedies, sanitation techniques, and strategies for stretching nutritious foods. Local networks of support, whether through neighbors, churches, or cooperative societies, disseminated practical health information, reinforcing preventive measures and creating informal healthcare systems. These networks were particularly vital in rural areas, where doctors and hospitals were distant and scarce. Seasonal illness management required foresight and preparation. Winter brought respiratory illnesses, colds, and flu, necessitating warm clothing, insulated homes, and attention to nutrition to maintain immunity. Summer carried risks of food spoilage, contaminated water, and insect-borne diseases. Housewives anticipated these challenges, adjusting household routines, food storage, and cleaning practices to minimize exposure and prevent outbreaks. Such strategic planning reflected an integration of environmental awareness, practical science, and domestic labor into daily life. Personal hygiene education was a constant responsibility. Children were taught to bathe regularly, brush teeth with limited resources, and maintain clean clothing. Teaching these habits required patience, consistency, and sometimes creativity, especially when resources like soap were scarce. The ability to instill lasting habits in children not only protected immediate health but also shaped long-term well-being, creating a ripple effect across generations. Monitoring and record-keeping were subtle yet essential aspects of household health management. Housewives tracked growth, weight, illness frequency, and recovery patterns in their families. Observing changes in patterns helped anticipate medical needs, adjust diets, and intervene early when problems arose. Even without formal education in medicine, these careful records reflected an empirical approach, relying on observation, experience, and critical thinking. Emergency preparedness was another vital aspect. Housewives knew how to handle minor injuries, burns, fractures, or allergic reactions using the tools and remedies available at home. First aid kits were assembled with basic supplies, bandages, antiseptics, and herbal treatments. Knowledge of simple but effective treatments, such as applying cold compresses or immobilizing a limb, allowed households to cope with accidents until professional help could be accessed. In addition to immediate family care, environmental hygiene extended to the entire household. Rodents, insects, and vermin were controlled to prevent disease transmission. Garbage was managed carefully, composted when possible, and disposed of in ways that minimized contamination. Households developed routines to reduce stagnant water, clean latrines, and maintain ventilation to prevent respiratory illness. These practices demonstrated a sophisticated awareness of public health principles long before they were standardized or regulated by government agencies. Finally, the role of the housewife in health and hygiene management highlighted the interconnectedness of domestic labor, survival, and science. Every act from boiling water to planning meals, from applying herbal remedies to monitoring hygiene was part of an integrated system designed to preserve life and maintain well-being. This labor was not optional. It was central to the family's survival. Housewives became practitioners of preventive medicine, nutrition, sanitation, and emergency care, translating knowledge, observation, and skill into tangible outcomes for their loved ones. Through vigilance, knowledge, and resourcefulness, housewives during the Great Depression became custodians of family health. Their expertise ensured not only the survival of individual family members but also the resilience of households in the face of widespread economic hardship. By managing sanitation, nutrition, preventive care, and emergency response, they created systems that safeguarded physical health and supported emotional and mental well-being. In this way, domestic labor emerged as a cornerstone of survival, demonstrating that everyday care, attention, and planning were critical weapons against illness, scarcity, and uncertainty. In the shadow of the Great Depression, when poverty and scarcity were ubiquitous, the strength of a family often depended not only on individual effort but also on the broader community. Housewives, while managing the household, became essential nodes in networks of mutual aid, relying on neighbors, extended family, and local organizations to share resources, information, and emotional support. These community-based systems were not merely acts of charity. They were strategic, practical, and often life-saving collaborations that sustained families through the harshest periods. Mutual aid among neighbors was a cornerstone of survival. Households pooled food, shared tools, and exchanged labor to accomplish tasks too difficult for one family to manage alone. For example, a neighbor might contribute milk from a cow, help with garden planting, or assist in sewing clothing for children, while another family offered firewood, bread, or guidance on childcare. These exchanges were not transactional in a strict monetary sense. Rather, they operated on trust, reciprocity, and social obligation. Maintaining these bonds required social skills, empathy, and a sense of responsibility, traits that many housewives cultivated daily. Housewives often organized informal support networks to address common challenges. Collectively, they would plan bulk purchases, rotate childcare duties, and create cooperative kitchens or laundries. Such arrangements allowed families to stretch limited resources further, reduce individual workloads, and ensure that children and the elderly were cared for even when parents had to work long hours. These networks created a sense of solidarity that was psychologically crucial. They reinforced the notion that families were not isolated in their struggles, and that survival was a shared endeavor. Community events and religious institutions further reinforced support systems. Churches, community halls, and local organizations often provided meals, clothing drives, and educational programs. Housewives frequently played central roles in these initiatives, organizing fundraising, distributing aid, and coordinating volunteers. Beyond material support, these spaces offered emotional comfort, fostering a sense of belonging and shared purpose. Participation in communal life was thus both a survival strategy and a social anchor, helping families navigate economic and emotional stress. One of the most critical aspects of community networks was the sharing of practical knowledge. Housewives exchanged recipes for nutritious but inexpensive meals, home remedies for common illnesses, tips on sewing and mending, and methods for preserving food. This collective wisdom allowed families to survive periods of scarcity with fewer health risks, reduced waste, and sustained nutrition. Knowledge sharing also included strategies for navigating social services or accessing public assistance, demonstrating how communities collectively adapted to external pressures. Childcare and education were often supported through cooperative arrangements. When parents had to work long hours, neighbors or older children took responsibility for younger ones, ensuring their safety, education, and emotional well-being. Informal study groups and skill-sharing sessions allowed children to continue learning even when schools were underfunded or overcrowded. Housewives, through these networks, extended their influence beyond the home, shaping the next generation's resilience, knowledge, and social skills. During crises, emergency assistance and resource pooling became vital. Families faced threats such as illness, unemployment, crop failure, or housing insecurity. In these situations, neighbors shared food, clothing, or shelter without expectation of immediate return. In rural areas, barns or homes might host families displaced by flooding or economic displacement, demonstrating a high degree of communal trust and cooperation. The willingness to respond quickly and collectively to emergencies amplified survival chances for all households involved. Emotional support and mental resilience were as critical as material aid. Housewives provided encouragement, shared coping strategies, and created social rituals that mitigated the psychological burden of poverty. Storytelling, communal meals, and social gatherings were ways to maintain morale and a sense of normalcy amidst hardship. The emotional labor involved in sustaining community cohesion was substantial. It required patience, diplomacy, and empathy, ensuring that interpersonal tensions did not erode vital support networks. Resourcefulness and innovation were often enhanced through community engagement. Housewives collectively brainstormed solutions to shared problems, building improvised heating systems, constructing furniture from scraps, or devising creative ways to store and preserve food. These collaborative efforts transformed scarcity into opportunity, demonstrating the adaptability and ingenuity of communities under pressure. Learning from neighbors, experimenting together, and iterating solutions created a dynamic system of survival innovation. Mutual accountability and social norms reinforced these networks. Trust was paramount, as families depended on one another for essential resources and support. Households adhered to expectations of reciprocity. Those receiving help were expected to contribute in some way when possible, creating a sustainable cycle of aid. Social norms and reputations ensured reliability, deterred exploitation, and maintained cohesion. Housewives were often the moral and organizational centers of these systems, ensuring that the rules of reciprocity and fairness were observed. Cultural and ethnic communities often strengthened mutual aid networks. Immigrant families, religious minorities, or ethnic enclaves relied heavily on shared traditions and social bonds. Festivities, rituals, and communal work projects reinforced solidarity and transmitted valuable survival knowledge. Housewives played central roles in preserving these cultural practices, ensuring that communal identity remained intact even as families faced economic and social pressures. Public assistance and charity organizations intersected with community networks to provide an additional layer of support. Housewives coordinated with local relief agencies, food banks, and charitable societies to access emergency rations, medical aid, and educational resources. Their familiarity with bureaucratic processes and social connections often determined the extent to which families benefited from available assistance. By acting as intermediaries between formal institutions and households, they enhanced the efficacy of aid distribution and reduced the risk of exclusion. Social cohesion also enabled long-term resilience. Families embedded in strong community networks were better able to weather successive economic shocks, natural disasters, or health crises. Children raised in such communities gained not only material security but also lessons in cooperation, empathy, and civic responsibility. Housewives' leadership in nurturing these networks ensured that communities were not merely surviving but also sustaining social capital that would benefit future generations. In conclusion, the role of housewives in community and social support during the Great Depression was multifaceted, essential, and transformative. Beyond managing their own households, they acted as organizers, mediators, educators, and caregivers within broader social networks. Their labor and social intelligence facilitated resource sharing, emergency preparedness, knowledge dissemination, childcare, emotional support, and cultural preservation. These networks of survival were not peripheral. They were central to household resilience, community cohesion, and the continuity of social structures during one of the most challenging periods in modern history. By fostering connections, sharing knowledge, and mobilizing collective resources, housewives exemplified the power of cooperative survival strategies. Their work illustrates how domestic labor, far from being private or isolated, intersected with public life, social organization, and communal well-being. The networks they cultivated remind us that human survival in times of crisis relies not only on individual ingenuity but also on empathy, collaboration, and the enduring strength of community bonds. As we reach the end of our journey through the lives of housewives during one of the most challenging periods in modern history, it is truly remarkable to see how their daily efforts shaped not only their own families but entire communities. From managing scarce resources, innovating in the kitchen and home, to nurturing children, preserving culture, and building networks of support, these women were far more than household caretakers. They were architects of resilience, cooperation, and survival. Each act of labor, no matter how small it seemed at the time, contributed to sustaining families and communities through economic hardship, social upheaval, and personal struggle. What stands out most is the incredible combination of resourcefulness, empathy, and perseverance these women demonstrated. They remind us that survival is rarely an individual endeavor. It thrives in the connections we maintain, the knowledge we share, and the care we extend to one another. Their stories are a testament to the quiet, often unseen strength that keeps societies alive through their most difficult trials. So, as we reflect on these stories today, let us remember that history is not only made by grand events or famous figures but also by the countless everyday actions of ordinary people. By understanding the struggles, ingenuity, and resilience of those who came before us, we gain a deeper appreciation for the human spirit and the networks of care and cooperation that make survival possible. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into history. If you enjoyed this story, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. We would love to hear how these stories of resilience resonate with you. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and remember that even the smallest acts of kindness and ingenuity can leave a lasting mark on the world.